A border world, forgotten by both empires, where the sky belongs to silver ships that never land, and the ground belongs to the men they never notice. The afternoon is quiet, amber light, dust settling on steel. A welder works alone at the edge of a settlement no one back home remembers exists. Then a sound tears through the atmosphere. High, thin, wrong. A ship, falling, trailing fire and smoke through the tree line. The impact shakes the ground for half a kilometer. Trees crack like bones. Metal screams against rock. He's running before the debris settles. Through the smoke, through the wreckage, past burning hull plates and shattered engines, until he hears it, a sound beneath the flames, small, barely there. A whimper. He tears the panel open with his bare hands, blood on silver. And inside, curled into the smallest space a body can occupy, a child who is not human, her eyes open. Part 1, the arc welder spit blue fire against the junction panel, and Rowan Hollis held it steady, the way he held everything steady, with two hands that didn't shake anymore. Not because they'd healed, because they'd forgotten how to feel. 62 years old, former combat medic, current nobody. He worked the seam slowly, methodically, the way a man works when he's got nowhere else to be and no one waiting for him to finish. The energy gate on the eastern perimeter of Tessara's only human settlement had been cracking along its base plate for 6 weeks. Rowan had told the station chief about it twice, filed the report once, then stopped asking and started fixing it himself. Because that's what he did. He fixed things that other people ignored, quietly, without conversation, without expecting anyone to notice. His quarters were a converted storage unit at the edge of the settlement, 12 feet by 14, a cot that creaked when he breathed too hard, a single shelf holding 3 books he'd read so many times the spines had gone soft, a hot plate, a water filter, and nothing on the walls. No photographs, no letters, no evidence that this man had once been someone with a family and a life and a reason to come home at the end of a shift. The other workers at the settlement left him alone. They'd learned, not because Rowan was cruel or cold, but because he gave off the particular quiet that certain men carry when they've decided the world is better off keeping its distance. He showed up, did his work, did it well, ate alone, slept alone, and never once, in 3 years on this planet, had he mentioned anything about his life before Tessara. A few had tried asking, early on, "Where are you from? What branch did you serve? Got any family back home?" He'd answered with silence, or a half nod that meant nothing, or the kind of redirect that made the other person feel like they'd asked something wrong without understanding why. Eventually, they stopped. Tessara was the kind of world that existed only because two empires hadn't decided who owned it yet. A border planet caught between human territory and the vast reach of the Valdris Empire. A species so advanced, so ancient, so proud, that they rarely looked at humans as anything more than a mild inconvenience sharing their stretch of galaxy. Rowan had seen their ships pass overhead, cold silver shapes cutting through the atmosphere without slowing, without landing, without acknowledging the handful of humans scratching out a living on the surface below. They moved through the sky like gods who couldn't be bothered to look down. And Rowan never looked up. He had stopped looking up 15 years ago. The welder hissed. Sparks scattered across the dirt at his feet. He adjusted the angle, leaned closer, let the heat wash over his face, and for a moment, just a moment, he felt the weight in his jacket pocket shift against his chest. A small copper bracelet, tarnished, bent slightly at the clasp where a child's wrist had pulled against it too many times. Engraved on the inside with a name he hadn't spoken out loud in 15 years. Emmy. I didn't reach for it. Didn't need to. He knew it was there the way you know your own heartbeat. Instant. Unquestioned. The only thing he carried from one day to the next that meant anything at all. His daughter had been 8 years old, and he had been 4 minutes too late. The mine collapsed on Bravora Station, Tunnel 7. He'd been on shift at the medical bay when the alarm hit. Ran the full distance in under 3 minutes. Heard her voice through the rubble, small and scared and calling for him. "Daddy, Daddy, I'm here." And he dug. God, he dug. with his hands, with tools, with anything he could grab. But the secondary collapse came before he could reach her. 4 minutes, that's all it would have taken. 4 minutes he didn't have. After that, he stopped being a medic, stopped holding anyone's hand, because every time he reached for a patient, every time small fingers wrapped around his palm in a recovery ward or a triage tent, he felt Emmy's hand, the one he never got to hold again, the one that had been reaching up through broken stone. 4 minutes of reaching, while her father clawed through rubble that wouldn't move fast enough. The therapist on Bravura Station told him it wasn't his fault, that no one could have reached her in time, that the secondary collapse was unpredictable. Rowan had looked at the therapist, nodded politely, and never gone back. Because unpredictable didn't change the math. Emmy needed 4 more minutes, and her father didn't have them. So he became a welder instead. Steel didn't grab your hand, steel didn't call your name, steel just sat there and let you burn it into whatever shape you needed. The arc welder clicked off. Rowan stood, rolled his shoulders. The afternoon light on Tessara had that amber quality that reminded him of nowhere in particular, which was exactly why he'd chosen this place. Then the sky split open. Not thunder, not lightning, something heavier. A sound that started high and thin, like tearing fabric, then dropped low, deep into his chest. A concussion wave he felt in his teeth before he heard it properly. He turned and saw the fire. A ship falling through the tree line to the west, trailing black smoke and burning debris, pieces of hull spinning off in every direction. The impact shook the ground beneath his boots. Trees cracked, split, went down like matchsticks in a path half a kilometer long. Rowan was already moving, not thinking, moving. His boots hit wet soil, his breath went sharp. His body remembered what his mind had spent 15 years trying to forget. That when something falls, when something breaks, when someone might be trapped inside wreckage, you run toward it, not away, even when running toward it cost you everything. He reached the crash site in under 8 minutes. The shuttle had carved a long, ugly scar through the forest floor. Trees lay flat in every direction. Smoke rose in thick columns. Something inside the wreckage was still burning, hissing, popping with small explosions that sent sparks arcing into the underbrush. He slowed his pace, scanned the debris. The ship was Valdris. He recognized the hull design immediately. That smooth organic curvature, the pale metal that looked almost like bone. He'd never seen one this close before. They never landed, never stopped. Until now. He expected soldiers, armed response, some kind of security detail pouring out of emergency exits with weapons raised and voices barking commands. Instead, silence, except for one sound, small, almost lost beneath the crackle of dying flames. A whimper, the kind of sound that cuts through everything else because your body knows what it means before your brain catches up. A child. Rowan moved faster, stepping over twisted metal, ducking beneath a section of hull that hung at a dangerous angle. His hand went to the sidearm at his hip. Habit, nothing more, because whatever was making that sound didn't need a weapon pointed at it. He found her in a section of the shuttle that had folded in on itself, collapsed walls forming a pocket of space barely large enough for a grown man to crawl into. And through a gap in the metal, he saw movement, small fingers, pale blue in color, pressing against the wreckage from the inside. Rowan didn't think. He grabbed the edge of the broken panel, pulled. His shoulders burned. The metal bit into his palms. Blood. His blood, red against silver. He pulled harder. The panel screeched, bent outward, gave way, and there she was, curled into the smallest space a body could occupy. Knees pulled tight, arms wrapped around herself. A child, maybe 9 in human years, though he had no real way to judge the age of her kind. Her skin held a soft blue tint that seemed to catch the dim light. Her eyes were wide, golden, filled with a fear so raw it hit him somewhere beneath his ribs like a fist. She wore torn ceremonial robes, delicate fabric, too fine for a crash site, too expensive for an ordinary passenger. Blood, dark violet, ran from a cut along her temple, down her cheek, dripping onto the metal beneath her. She flinched the moment their eyes met, pressed herself deeper into the corner, as if the wreckage itself could protect her from whatever he was. And something inside Rowan cracked, because he'd seen that look before. Once, 15 years ago, through a gap in collapsed rubble, two small eyes staring up at him, terrified, trusting, begging him to reach just a little further. He raised both hands, palms open, showing her nothing but skin. "I'm not going to hurt you." She didn't understand. He knew that. But tone matters more than language when fear is the only thing in the room. He'd learned that much from years of holding people together in field hospitals, from years of saying the same words to soldiers who spoke 6 different languages. The meaning doesn't live in the words. It lives in the way you breathe them. She stared at him, breathing in short, panicked bursts, her small chest rising and falling too fast. Behind him, deeper in the forest, weapon fire, not close, but not far enough. Whoever brought this shuttle down wasn't finished. They were still out there. And if they found survivors, Rowan doubted they would offer open palms and gentle voices. He made his decision, reached forward, slow, giving her every chance to pull away, and gently lifted her from the wreckage. She was lighter than he expected, trembling against his chest, her small hands gripping the fabric of his jacket with a strength that surprised him. Her fingers curled into the collar, tight, desperate, the way a drowning person grabs the edge of a boat, the way Emmy used to grab his shirt during thunderstorms. "Stop it. Stop it right now. Not here. Not with gunfire in the trees and smoke in the air and a child's blood soaking through the shoulder of his jacket. Not now." He swallowed the memory down, forced it into the locked room inside his chest where it belonged, where it had lived for 15 years. Behind a door he never opened. Not for anyone. Not for anything. Until today, when a pair of wide amber eyes and a set of small blue fingers found the handle without even trying. He carried her away from the crash, moving low, moving fast, staying beneath the tree canopy, his senses stretched thin, every snap of a branch, every shift of wind. He cataloged them automatically. Combat medic training never really left your body. It just waited, patient, until you needed it again. The forest around Tessara was old and dense, full of shadows that could hide anything. He had no idea who had attacked this shuttle. Human pirates, Valdris separatists, something else entirely. Border zone piracy had grown worse in recent months. Raiders who didn't care about species or politics, only cargo, only profit. The girl in his arms stayed silent, but he felt her heartbeat against his chest. Fast, frantic, a small, rapid drumming that reminded him of a bird trapped behind glass. I wanted to say something, couldn't find words that mattered, so he held her steady, shielded her head with one broad hand, and kept moving. They had been moving for maybe 15 minutes when the ground dropped away ahead of them. A shallow ravine, cut into the forest floor by some ancient stream that had long since dried up, deep enough to hide 2 people if they stayed low, wide enough to move along without exposing themselves above the rim. Rowan dropped into it first, set her gently against the dirt wall. She landed without a sound, already learning, already adapting. He crouched beside her, pressed his back against the cold earth, and listened. The forest was talking, not the wind, not the creatures, something else, something deliberate. Voices, not human. The language was smooth, layered, musical in structure, but there was nothing musical about the way they were shouting. Search parties, moving through the smoke near the crash site. Tall figures in dark armor, weapons drawn. Rowan risked a glance over the edge. At least 6 of them, spread out, scanning the wreckage, moving with military precision, coordinated, professional. I didn't know if these were her people come to rescue her, or the people who'd shot her out of the sky. He wasn't willing to gamble on it. He pressed his back against the cold dirt, held her closer, close enough that he could feel her rib cage expanding against his arm with each shallow breath. He put one finger gently to his lips. She understood. Those wide eyes locked onto his, and for the first time, he saw something other than pure terror in them. Confusion, maybe, or the smallest flicker of something he didn't dare call trust. Not yet. Above them, boots crunched through dead leaves. Heavy, deliberate, close enough that loose dirt trickled from the rim of the ravine onto Rowan's shoulder. A voice barked something sharp. Another answered. The footsteps paused. Right above them. Rowan stopped breathing, felt her hand tighten on his jacket, her entire body going rigid, a statue carved from fear and blue skin and eyes squeezed shut. 3 seconds passed. 5. An eternity compressed into the space between heartbeats. Then the footsteps moved on. The search party passed, their voices fading as they followed scattered footprints near the wreck. A false trail leading nowhere useful. Thank God for soft ground and confusing terrain. Rowan exhaled slowly, counted to 60, then counted to 60 again, then one more time because twice didn't feel like enough. Only then did he look at her properly. Up close. The details sharpened. Her skin had a faint luminescence, barely visible in daylight. But there, a soft glow beneath the surface, like moonlight trapped underwater. The patterns woven into her torn robes were intricate, deliberate, not decorative, meaningful. This was no ordinary child. Everything about her, the fabric, the shuttle, the armed response already combing the forest, screamed importance. Someone had wanted her dead or captured badly enough to bring down an armed transport over hostile territory, which meant Rowan had just stepped directly between two forces he didn't understand. Armed with a sidearm, a torn jacket, and the medical instincts of a man who'd spent the last 15 years trying to forget he ever had them. Wonderful, truly wonderful timing. He looked at the girl. She was watching him, no longer pressed flat against the ravine wall, her body still tense, still ready to run. But her eyes had shifted. She was studying him now, the way a child studies something she hasn't decided about yet. "I don't know what you understand," he said quietly, "but I need you to stay close. I'm not going to let anyone hurt you. Not the people chasing you. Not anyone." She tilted her head, a motion that reminded him of something small and cautious, trying to make sense of a sound it had never heard. Then she reached out, one small blue hand, moving slowly toward his jacket sleeve. Her fingers touched the rough fabric, traced the seam along his forearm, as if testing whether he was real, and Rowan felt the ground shift beneath him. Because the last person who touched his sleeve that way had been 3 feet tall, with brown hair and a laugh that sounded like water running over stones. He didn't pull away. He sat very still, and let her hand stay where it landed. Night came fast on Tessara. The temperature dropped like a stone. Rowan found a shallow cave carved into a rocky hillside, half hidden behind hanging vines. Not much, but enough to block the wind and hide them from anyone searching the open ground. He settled the girl inside, wrapped his spare jacket around her narrow shoulders. It swallowed her entirely. She looked like a child playing dress-up in her father's coat, and that image hit him harder than he was prepared for. He took position near the entrance, sidearm within reach, back against stone, eyes on the tree line where 2 moons rose above the forest, casting double shadows that made the darkness feel alive. Restless, like something pacing just beyond the edge of sight. The temperature dropped further. He could see his breath now, small clouds of vapor dissolving into the dark. The girl shivered despite the jacket wrapped around her, drew her knees tighter, tucked her chin down. Rowan hesitated, then shifted closer to the entrance wall. Not toward her, just close enough that his body heat might reach her without the threat of physical contact she hadn't invited. He'd spent enough years in field hospitals to understand the mathematics of trauma. You don't crowd someone who's afraid. You reduce the distance, slowly, and you let them close the rest of the gap on their own terms. He waited. She sat quietly for a long while, knees to her chest, eyes reflecting the moonlight, watching him, always watching him, her gaze moving from his face, to his hands, to the weapon near his leg, trying to piece together what kind of creature she was trapped with. Silence would only make it worse. Rowan broke off a piece of his ration bar, held it out, and waited. She stared at it, long enough that he thought she might refuse. Then her small hand extended, took it, sniffed it carefully, took the smallest possible bite. Nothing bad happened. She ate a little more, and something in her shoulders loosened, just slightly. My name is Rowan, he said, tapping his chest gently. Rowan. She watched, considered, then looked down at herself, and after a pause so long he thought she might not respond at all, she whispered a word, soft, almost lost in the cave's quiet. Lyrae. First sound she'd made since the crash, and it hit him in the chest like a held breath finally released. Lyrae, he repeated, carefully, letting the syllables settle. She nodded, once, confirming, and the faintest change crossed her expression. Not a smile, something before a smile. The recognition that she had given him something, a piece of herself, and he had received it gently. It struck him harder than it should have. This girl had survived a crash that should have killed her, had been chased through a forest by armed soldiers, had ended up alone in a cave with a creature her people probably considered a step above wildlife. And here she was, offering her name to him, like a hand extended across a gap she couldn't see the bottom of. From that small exchange, something shifted between them. Not trust, not yet. Something earlier than trust, something more fragile. The recognition that they were both here, both alive, both willing to try. He kept his movement slow through the night, never raised his voice. When she flinched at the distant howl of some unseen creature in the forest, he didn't reach for her, just stayed still. Let her decide. And somewhere around the third hour, she decided. It started small, a shift in posture, knees turning slightly toward him instead of away, then a pause, testing, gauging, reading his body language for any sign of threat, finding none. Then she moved, slowly, so slowly he almost didn't register it was happening. The way a cat approaches a warm surface, it hasn't tested yet. 1 inch, then another, then a longer stretch of stillness, then another inch, until she settled against his arm, her small body tucked against his side, her hand finding the edge of his sleeve, curling her fingers loosely around the fabric, the way Emmy used to hold his sleeve during storms, the exact way. Rowan's jaw tightened, his vision blurred for half a second. He blinked it away, breathed through it, the way he'd breathed through 1,000 moments like this over the past 15 years. Except none of them had been exactly like this, because none of them had involved a child actually touching him, actually choosing to be close. He didn't move for a very long time. By the time the first light touched the treetops, she was asleep, leaning against him, her breathing slow and even, her face relaxed for the first time since he'd pulled her from the wreckage. And in that pale morning light, Rowan noticed something he'd missed in the chaos of the day before. The neckline of her torn robes had shifted during sleep, exposing a section of fabric beneath the outer layer. And there, woven directly into the inner garment, was a symbol. He recognized it immediately, not because he'd studied Valdris culture, but because every human stationed on border worlds had been shown images of Valdris royal insignia during basic orientation. Standard protocol, know the markings, avoid incidents. The symbol was intricate, layered, gold thread woven against deep blue in patterns that shifted slightly depending on the angle of the light. A design that represented the ruling bloodline of the Valdris Empire. Not a noble's house crest, not a military rank, not some advisor's pin or diplomat's marking, the royal seal itself, the singular mark of the imperial family. Rowan stared at it. His brain did the thing brains do when they receive information they aren't prepared to process. It rejected it first, then circled back, then rejected it again, then landed on it with the full weight of understanding and felt the floor drop out. He looked down at the sleeping girl tucked against his arm. 9 years old, give or take, heir to the most powerful empire in the known galaxy. Someone had shot down a royal transport over a border world with the princess inside, which meant whoever was hunting through this forest, they weren't looking for cargo, they weren't raiders chasing profit, they were looking for her, specifically, deliberately, and they would not stop until they found her, alive or dead. Rowan closed his eyes, pressed the back of his head against the cold stone wall. Of all the people on all the worlds, in all the systems between here and Earth, This child had fallen from the sky and landed in the arms of a 62-year-old welder with a bad knee and a broken communicator, a man who couldn't save his own daughter, now holding the daughter of an empress. He looked down at Lyrie again, still sleeping, still holding his sleeve, still trusting him with every breath she took. And he made a decision, silent, absolute, the kind you make with your whole body, not just your mind. He was going to get this girl somewhere safe. He didn't care who was looking for her. He didn't care what it cost. He'd been 4 minutes too late once in his life. Not again, never again. Thousands of light years away, in a city built from towers of pale crystal that caught the light of 3 distant suns. The news arrived like a blade. Queen Valerin of the Valdris Empire received word in her private chambers, standing before wide-arched windows that overlooked the sprawling capital below. The chamber was vast, cold, designed for ceremony rather than comfort. But she stood in it alone, the way she stood in most rooms, alone and perfectly composed. She looked young. That was the first thing anyone noticed. And the second, and the third. The Valdris aged slowly, centuries passing over their features the way seasons pass over stone, wearing nothing away, changing nothing visible to the untrained eye. Valoran had ruled for decades, had fought wars, negotiated treaties, buried enemies and allies alike. But her face showed none of it. Golden hair fell past her shoulders, long and straight, catching the chamber's ambient light until it seemed to glow. Her skin was pale, almost luminous, the kind of white that looked carved from something precious rather than born from biology. Her features were sharp, elegant, a face that belonged on the prow of a warship or the cover of a mythology. Beautiful in the way that dangerous things are beautiful, in the way that a blade is beautiful when it catches the light just before it falls. But her eyes were different. They were old, immeasurably old, gold like her daughter's, but deeper, heavier, carrying the weight of every decision she'd ever made for a civilization that spanned 1,000 worlds. The messenger entered, knelt, spoke the words with the particular tremor of a person delivering news they know will change the shape of everything that follows. The shuttle carrying Princess Lyrie was intercepted over the Tessara corridor. Contact was lost during the engagement. The vessel is presumed destroyed. No survivors have been confirmed. Valoran did not cry out, did not collapse, did not reach for the wall. She simply stood, her hands pressed flat against the glass of the window, her reflection staring back at her. That impossibly young face, showing nothing, revealing nothing, while behind it, something enormous shifted, rearranged itself, settled into a configuration that every person in that room recognized instinctively. The Queen had entered a state beyond grief. She had entered calculation. "Dispatch every search vessel within range of the Tessara coordinates," she said, her voice level, controlled, each word placed with surgical precision. "Every soldier stationed near the border is to begin ground operations immediately. Comb every kilometer of that forest until my daughter is found." She paused, alive or otherwise. Lord Dravain stepped forward from the shadows near the chamber's eastern wall. He had been standing there throughout the exchange, watching, waiting, the way he always waited, patient, measured. 20 years at the Queen's side had taught him exactly when to speak and exactly how much silence to leave before speaking. I was tall, lean in the way that suggested discipline rather than deprivation. His face was narrow, composed, unremarkable in every way except for his eyes, which were sharp, intelligent, and gave away absolutely nothing. "My Queen," he said, bowing his head with practiced grace, "allow me to personally oversee the search operation. I will coordinate all military assets, ensure that no resource is spared. The princess will be found." Valoran looked at him, studied him the way she studied everything, with the precision of someone who had survived by never trusting appearances. But Dravain had been her most trusted advisor for 2 decades, through 3 territorial disputes, 2 assassination attempts, 1 civil uprising. He had stood beside her through all of it, loyal, unwavering, the one pillar she never questioned. "Go," she said. He bowed again, turned, left the chamber with measured steps. And Valerian returned to the window, to the reflection of a young woman who looked like she should be attending university rather than commanding fleets. A face that would never age enough to match the grief behind it. She pressed her forehead against the glass, cold against her skin, and for one breath, just one, the mask slipped. Not enough for anyone to see. The room was empty now, the messenger dismissed, the guard stationed outside. But even alone, even with no witness but the glass in the distant city lights. The slip lasted only a single heartbeat before she pulled the composure back into place. Like armor she'd worn so long it had become skin. But in that heartbeat, she was not a queen. She was a mother standing at a window, imagining the worst thing a mother can imagine, and finding that all the power in the galaxy couldn't stop the imagining. Her daughter, her only child, the one person in 1,000 worlds who had ever seen past the crown and the composure and the terrible weight of ruling. The one person who called her not by title, but by name, Mama. Valerian's fingers curled against the glass, leaving faint marks. Somewhere on Tessara, in a forest she had never set foot in, on a world she had barely thought about until this moment. Her daughter was either dead or alone, or in the hands of creatures that Valerian's people had spent centuries dismissing as irrelevant. And beneath every controlled breath, beneath every precisely delivered command, a single thought burned. If humans had anything to do with her daughter's death, there would be no mercy left in her for the species, none at all. Lord Dravain walked the length of the crystal corridor outside the Queen's chambers, his footsteps echoing against the polished floor, his expression fixed in the appropriate mask of concern and determination. He rounded a corner, checked that the corridor was empty, stepped into a private alcove, and activated an encrypted communication channel built into the underside of his wrist guard. The connection established in seconds. Status, he said, his voice stripped of every trace of the deference he'd shown moments ago. A response came, crackling, distorted by distance and encryption. Shuttle destroyed as planned. Ground teams are sweeping the crash site now. No confirmed recovery of the primary target. Dravain's jaw tightened. No confirmed recovery means she may still be alive. The crash was severe. Survival probability is irrelevant. His voice cut like a scalpel. Find her. If she is alive, end it. Quietly. No witnesses, no traces that can be connected to this court. Silence on the line. And the search operation the Queen just authorized. Dravain's mouth curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. I'm leading it personally, which means I control where it looks, and more importantly, where it doesn't. He severed the connection, straightened his robes, reassembled his expression into the mask of a loyal servant, and walked back toward the command center. He checked the corridor once more. Empty, clean, no witnesses, no recordings that his personal encryption couldn't erase before morning. 20 years he had waited. 20 years of standing one step behind the throne, watching a queen who would never age, never weaken, never step aside, ruling forever while everyone around her grew old in her shadow. But a queen without an heir was a queen without a future, and a throne without a future eventually needed someone to decide what came next. Dravain intended to be that someone. All it required was a dead child on a forgotten planet, and a grief-stricken queen too broken to see the blade at her back. On Tessara, morning light cut through the canopy in long golden shafts, turning the forest floor into a patchwork of gold and shadow that might have been beautiful under different circumstances. Circumstances that did not include armed search parties, a destroyed shuttle, and a child with a royal seal hidden beneath torn robes. Rowan woke Lyra gently. She opened her eyes slowly. Confusion first, then memory, settling over her small face like clouds covering the sun. She looked at him, then at the mouth of the cave, and he could see her calculating, deciding, the same way she'd been deciding about him since the moment he'd pulled her from the wreckage. We need to move, he said, gesturing toward the forest. Not safe here. She nodded, understanding the tone, the urgency. They left the cave together, moving carefully along a narrow path that wound down the hillside, staying beneath thick branches. Rowan kept his sidearm ready, hoped he wouldn't need it. His priority was distance, not confrontation. Put as much space as possible between them and whoever was searching the forest behind them. Lyra stayed close, matching her pace to his without being told, walking just behind his right shoulder, close enough that he could reach her instantly. They walked for 2 hours, maybe 3. Rowan set a pace he hoped was fast enough to create distance but slow enough that Lyra could maintain it without exhaustion. She was small, her legs shorter than his by half, but she kept up, doggedly, stubbornly, without complaint. Once, she stumbled on a root, caught herself against his leg, looked up at him quickly, almost apologetically, as if falling was something she should be ashamed of. He shook his head, offered his hand. She took it, and didn't let go for the next 20 minutes. The forest grew denser, darker, the canopy so thick above them that the morning light barely reached the ground. Every sound amplified, every rustle of leaves, every crack of a distant branch became something to catalog, to evaluate, to dismiss or respond to. It was during the third hour, rounding a massive fallen tree, that Rowan saw it, a body. He stopped, put his arm out instinctively, blocking Lyra from moving forward. She bumped against his hand, made a small questioning sound. "Stay here," he said, firm but quiet. He moved forward alone. 5 steps. 10. The body lay face down in the undergrowth. Valdris, male, wearing a flight uniform that matched the design of the crashed shuttle. The pilot. Had to be. He'd been thrown clear during the crash, or ejected, or Rowan crouched, rolled the body gently, and stopped. The pilot hadn't died from the crash. His injuries were wrong for that. No crush damage, no burn patterns consistent with impact or fire. There was a single wound, clean, precise, dead center between the shoulder blades, an energy weapon discharge at close range, the kind of wound that could only be inflicted from behind, by someone standing within arm's reach, shot in the back. Rowan stared at the wound, his combat medic training kicking in without permission, reading the damage the way a linguist reads text. Entry angle, burn radius, tissue displacement, every detail telling a story he didn't want to hear. The weapon signature was wrong for human technology. Human energy weapons left ragged burns, uneven edges. This was clean, precise, surgical. The kind of damage that came from Valdris military tech. High grade, officer issue, not the rough equipment carried by border raiders or freelance mercenaries. And the angle, close range, from directly behind. The pilot hadn't seen it coming, hadn't turned, hadn't tried to run. He'd been standing, probably helping someone, probably doing his job, when someone he trusted put a weapon between his shoulder blades and fired. The pilot hadn't been killed by raiders, hadn't been killed by humans, hadn't been killed by anyone from the outside. He'd been murdered by his own people. Rowan sat back on his heels. The forest suddenly felt different around him. Colder, the shadows deeper, because this wasn't a random attack on a transport. This was planned, coordinated, from inside the Valdris Empire itself. Someone within Lyra's own government had ordered that shuttle destroyed, had killed her pilot, her protector, and sent hunters to make sure the job was finished. This wasn't a kidnapping, this was an assassination. And the target was a 9-year-old girl standing 20 feet behind him in a torn robe and an oversized jacket. A sound behind him. He turned. Too late. Lyra had followed. Of course she had. She stood 3 steps away, staring past him, at the body on the ground, at the face of the pilot she recognized, the person who'd been tasked with protecting her, keeping her safe. Her expression crumbled. Not dramatically, not loudly. The way grief hits a child, all at once, without preparation, without the armor adults build over years of practice. Her eyes filled, her small body went rigid, and a sound escaped her throat, high and thin and terrible. She knew him, this pilot. He was hers, her protector, her familiar face on a strange journey, and now he lay in the dirt with a hole burned through his back by a weapon that should have been protecting him. Rowan moved without thinking, closed the distance, dropped to his knees, pulled her against his chest. one hand covering her eyes, the other wrapped around her shoulders, holding her tight. "Don't look," he said, his voice rough, breaking slightly at the edges. "Don't look at that. Look at me. Stay with me." She buried her face in his jacket, her small hands gripping the fabric with that desperate strength he was beginning to recognize, her body shaking with silent sobs. Tears, violet, running down her cheeks and soaking into the rough material at his shoulder. And Rowan held her, the way he'd wanted to hold Emmy, through the rubble, through the collapse, through those 4 minutes that lasted longer than any lifetime should. I held this girl, this stranger's child, this princess from an empire that didn't know his name, and he made the same promise he'd made the day before. Except this time it wasn't silent. "I've got you," he said, his chin resting on top of her head, his eyes fixed on the tree line, scanning for movement. "I've got you, and I'm not letting go." She pressed tighter against him, her grip on his jacket shifting slightly, finding the sleeve, curling her fingers around it, holding on. The way children hold on when the world stops making sense, when the people who were supposed to keep them safe have failed, when the sky they trusted has fallen, and the only solid thing left is the chest of a stranger who hasn't let go yet. Rowan remembered that feeling. From the other side, Emmy's hand in the rubble, reaching up toward his voice, trusting that his voice meant safety, meant rescue, meant her father was coming and everything would be okay, and he hadn't reached her in time. But he was reaching now, 15 years later, on a different world, for a different child. And this time, his hands were not empty, and somewhere, in the deep quiet of his chest, behind the wall he'd built 15 years ago, something stirred, something painful, something necessary, not healing, not yet, not anything so clean or simple, just a door cracking open an inch after a lifetime of being sealed shut. Rowan lifted her, carried her away from the body, away from the clearing, back into the shadows of the forest where the trees grew thick enough to hide them from whatever was coming next. Because something was coming. He could feel it the way old soldiers feel weather changes, in his bones, in the prickling at the back of his neck, the kind of certainty that comes not from evidence, but from having survived enough bad situations to recognize the shape of the next one before it arrives. The pilot had been killed by Valdris weapons. The shuttle had been brought down by someone with access to Valdris military codes. Someone inside the Empire wanted this girl dead, and that someone was now controlling the search operation sent to find her, which meant the rescue teams weren't coming to rescue anyone. They were coming to finish the job. Lyrie's grip on his sleeve didn't loosen as they moved deeper into the forest. If anything, it tightened, her small fingers wrapped so firmly around the fabric that he could feel the pressure against his wrist like a second pulse. He adjusted her weight against his chest, felt the copper bracelet shift in his pocket. Two weights, one old, one new, one he carried because he couldn't let go, one he carried because he refused to. The forest stretched ahead of them, dense, unwelcoming, full of shadows and distance and the growing certainty that whatever safety looked like, it was still very far away. But Rowan Hollis had been 4 minutes too late once in his life, and he had spent every day since then making sure it never happened again. He tightened his hold on Lyrie, checked his sidearm, scanned the tree line one more time. Somewhere out there, behind the curtain of trees and distance, men with weapons and orders and encrypted communications were closing the net around a child who didn't know why her own people wanted her dead. And somewhere far beyond the sky, a queen with golden hair and ancient eyes was staring at a window, believing the worst, preparing for grief, trusting the one man she should never have trusted. None of them knew about Rowan Hollis, the welder, the nobody, the man with a copper bracelet in his pocket and a dead daughter's name engraved on his heart. But they would. He adjusted Lyrie against his chest, felt her fingers tighten around his sleeve, felt the weight of the copper bracelet shift in his pocket, both pulling him forward into a forest that offered no promise of safety and no guarantee of survival. He didn't need a guarantee. He just needed to not be late. Not this time. And he kept walking. Part 2. The forest changed on the third day. Not gradually, not the way seasons shift or light fades. It changed the way a conversation changes when someone in the room pulls a weapon. One moment the trees were thick and sheltering, green canopy overhead, soft ground beneath their feet. The next, the terrain tilted upward, the soil turned rocky, the canopy thinned until patches of open sky appeared between the branches like holes in a ceiling that was slowly coming apart. And open sky meant open exposure. Rowan noticed the shift before Lyrie did. He'd been running calculations in the back of his mind since dawn, mapping their route against the terrain changes, measuring the distance between usable cover points, counting the seconds of exposure each gap in the canopy would cost them if a search vessel passed overhead. The math wasn't good. 3 days of running, 3 days of sleeping in caves and hollows and beneath overhangs that barely qualified as shelter. His body was beginning to file formal complaints. His knees ached with every step. The scrapes along his palms from pulling wreckage metal had scabbed over but cracked open again with every handhold, and the ration bars were nearly gone. But none of that mattered as much as the sky opening up above them. He adjusted their route, staying close to the densest clusters of growth, moving from shadow to shadow. But the shadows were getting shorter, and the gaps between them were getting wider. Lyrie walked beside him now, not behind, beside. That had changed sometime during the second day. After the pilot, after the tears, after the long, silent hours of walking where neither of them spoke, because there was nothing to say that the silence wasn't already saying for them. She had stopped following and started walking with him, matching his stride with two of her own, her small legs working double time to keep pace without complaint. She had also stopped flinching. He noticed it, the way you notice a sound that's been running in the background for days, suddenly going quiet. The constant low-level tension in her body, the readiness to bolt, the way she used to hold herself as if every muscle was coiled for escape. It was gone. Not entirely, but enough that Rowan could feel the difference when she stood near him. The difference between a child preparing to run and a child who had decided to stay. It shouldn't have mattered as much as it did, but it did. They reached a stream late in the morning, not wide, maybe 4 meters across, but fast, the water dark and cold, running over stones that were slick with moss and whatever passed for algae on a world where the biology followed rules Rowan had never studied. He tested the footing first, stepped onto the first stone, found it solid enough to hold, moved to the second, turned back, offered his hand. Lyrie took it. No hesitation now, her small blue fingers wrapping around his palm with the simple confidence of someone who had decided that this hand was safe, that this hand would hold. They were halfway across when her foot slipped. The stone she'd stepped on shifted, rolled. Her ankle twisted sideways and she went down fast, one knee hitting the water, her body pitching forward toward the current. Rowan caught her. Reflex, his free hand shooting out and grabbing the back of her jacket. His jacket, the one he'd wrapped around her 3 days ago that still swallowed her like a blanket. He pulled her upright, steadied her. She was soaked from the waist down, shivering. But her hand never let go of his. Not during the slip, not during the fall, not during the moment when the water tried to take her legs out from under her, and physics demanded she release her grip to catch herself. She held on, and Rowan felt something shift in his chest that he wasn't prepared to name, because the last person who had held his hand that way, who had refused to let go even when the world was pulling them apart, stop. He pulled her the rest of the way across, set her on solid ground, knelt down, checked her ankle, swollen, not broken. The combat medic still lived somewhere inside his hands, even if he'd spent 15 years pretending otherwise. Okay, he asked. She nodded, teeth chattering, but her eyes steady, and something in her expression that looked almost annoyed. Not at him, at the stream, at her own foot for betraying her. As if falling was a personal insult she intended to file a complaint about later. Despite everything, despite the fear and the exhaustion and the dead pilot, and the knowledge that armed killers were combing this forest looking for them. Rowan felt the corner of his mouth twitch, not a smile, almost, but not quite. They kept moving. The terrain grew steeper through the afternoon. rocky hills replacing the gentle forest floor, forcing them to climb more than walk. Rowan's knees protested every incline. 62 years of living will do that, especially when most of those years involve standing on hard floors and kneeling beside broken machinery. Larry struggled with the steeper sections, her arms too short to reach the handholds Rowan used, her legs too small for the gaps between footholds. Each time, he lifted her, boosted her up, felt her small arms wrap around his neck with complete trust as he raised her past the difficult passage and set her down on the ledge above. It was during one of these climbs, cresting a steep ridge of loose shale, that the stone beneath Rowan's right boot gave way. He felt it go, the sickening lurch of solid ground becoming empty air, his weight shifting backward. Momentum taking over. Lyrie still in his arms. He had maybe half a second to decide. He twisted, hard, rotating his body so that his back faced the slope and Lyrie faced the sky, wrapping both arms around her, pulling her tight against his chest. The impact hit him between the shoulder blades, a flat, hard shock that drove every molecule of air from his lungs. His back scraped across stone. His head bounced once against something solid. Stars exploded behind his eyes. Then he hit the bottom of the incline and stopped. Lyrie scrambled off him immediately, her small hands pressing against his chest, patting, checking, her eyes wide with panic. The same panic he'd seen in them the day they met. But different now, not fear for herself, fear for him. Her fingers found the back of his head, came away clean, no blood. She checked his shoulders, his ribs, pressing gently along his sides the way someone checks who has watched medical procedures before, who has paid attention. Fine, Rowan managed, though the word came out more like a wheeze than a statement. Just knock the wind out. She did not look convinced, her eyes narrowing with an expression of skepticism that seemed far too sophisticated for a 9-year-old. She pointed at him, then at the ground. A clear instruction, stay down. And before he could protest, she reached into the satchel she carried, pulled out a small container of the Valdris medical salve they'd taken from the supply cache days earlier, and began applying it to the scrapes along his forearms with careful, practiced hands. Her touch was gentle, deliberate, the same gentleness he'd shown her when he cleaned the cut along her temple on their first night in the cave. Return now, in kind. Something had changed, not just the falling, not just the stream crossing, something larger, something that had been building since the moment she first touched his sleeve in the darkness and decided not to pull away. She was no longer just relying on him for protection. She had started protecting him back, in whatever small ways she could manage, bandaging his scrapes, warning him when she heard sounds he missed. Her hearing was sharper than his, tuned to frequencies that human ears couldn't register. More than once, she had stopped mid-stride, tilted her head, then tugged him into cover seconds before a distant engine hummed past above the canopy. She heard them coming before his senses even registered the vibration. She tugged his sleeve to redirect him around uneven ground she spotted before he did. Her eyes were better in low light. Another advantage of Valdris biology, in the dimming hours before sunset. When Rowan's vision began to flatten and blur, hers sharpened. She navigated the failing light as easily as he navigated the bright afternoon. Once, when a low growl echoed from somewhere in the darkness ahead, something large, something that sounded like it owned whatever territory they were trespassing through. She grabbed his hand and pulled him firmly in the opposite direction, without hesitation, without waiting for him to assess the threat, just pulling, hard enough that he stumbled before following, the way a partner pulls, not a child. And once, late on the third night, when Rowan had dozed off against a tree trunk, exhaustion finally outrunning his discipline, he woke to find her sitting beside him, awake, alert, watching the forest with those bright eyes that never seemed to tire, her small hand resting on his forearm, not holding, just resting, so she would feel him move if something approached and she needed to wake him. She had taken a watch. A 90-year-old princess from the most powerful empire in the galaxy, standing guard over a sleeping human welder with a bad knee and a broken heart. The frightened girl curled into the wreckage of a burning shuttle had become something else entirely. Someone resourceful, someone brave, someone who trusted him not because she had no other option, but because he had given her a reason, and she intended to give him one back. Thousands of light years away, in the crystal towers of the Valdris capital, Queen Valoren sat alone in the strategic command chamber. She had taken to reviewing the search reports herself. Every one, every page, every coordinate log and deployment manifest that Dravain's operation generated. Not because she doubted him, not yet, but because sitting idle while her daughter remained missing was a kind of pain she could not tolerate. And Valerian had survived 100 years of ruling by never tolerating pain when action was available. The reports were thorough, detailed, professional. Every search grid was accounted for, every team deployment logged with timestamps and outcomes. Dravain had organized the operation with his characteristic precision, everything in its proper place, almost too proper. Valerian pulled up the original crash telemetry, the last known coordinates of Lyrie's shuttle before contact was lost. She overlaid them against the search grid Dravain had established, and paused. The crash coordinates fell within a specific sector of the Tessara forest. Grid reference Tessara 7 through Tessara 12. But Dravain's search teams were concentrated in sectors Tessara 15 through Tessara 22. A full 6 grids to the east, deeper into the forest, further from the actual crash site. Perhaps there was a reason. Perhaps his ground teams had detected movement or signals that led them to redirect. It was possible, reasonable even. But Valerian had not survived 100 years by accepting reasonable explanations without verification. She pulled up the communication logs between Dravain's command post and the ground teams, scrolled through timestamps, cross-referenced deployment orders against the search grid shifts. The first redirect order had been issued within 90 minutes of the search beginning, before any ground team had reported contact, before any signal had been detected, before any evidence existed to justify moving the search 6 grids to the east. Dravain had redirected the search away from where Lyrie's shuttle had actually gone down, and he had done it almost immediately, as if he already knew the shuttle wouldn't be where the telemetry said it would be, as if he knew the crash would happen before it happened, as if the search wasn't meant to find anything at all. Valerian stared at the screen, her reflection staring back at her from the dark surface, golden hair framing a face that showed nothing, revealed nothing. A face that had learned 100 years ago to never let the inside match the outside. But behind that face, something cold and precise began to assemble itself. Not grief, not anymore. Something sharper, something with edges. She thought of Dravain standing in her chamber, head bowed, voice steady, offering to lead the search personally. The perfect posture of loyalty, the perfect words of devotion, and behind them, what? 20 years of patience, 20 years of standing close enough to the throne to measure its weaknesses. She wasn't certain, not yet. A coordinate discrepancy was not proof, not enough to move against the most powerful advisor in her court, not enough to justify dismantling 20 years of trust on the basis of a grid reference. But it was enough to stop trusting blindly. She closed the files, locked the terminal with her personal encryption, and sat very still in the empty chamber for a long time. She would need more evidence before she moved. Dravain's position was too entrenched, his allies too numerous, his loyalty record too pristine for a single coordinate discrepancy to justify confrontation. But the seed had been planted, and Valerian was very, very patient. On Tessara. The 4th day brought rain, not the gentle kind, the kind that turned the forest floor into a river and made every slope a potential slide into injury or exposure. Rowan and Lyrie pressed forward through it, soaked to the skin, heads down, moving by instinct more than sight through a world that had become water and gray light and the constant roar of rain against leaves. It was Lyrie who spotted the outpost first. She tugged Rowan's sleeve, pointed through the curtain of rain toward a shape that didn't belong among the organic curves of the forest. Angular, metallic, a communications array rising above the tree line, human design, standard frontier model, a border outpost, small, maybe a 6-person station. the kind scattered across Tessara for monitoring local conditions and maintaining a minimal human presence in disputed territory. Rowan felt something loosen in his chest for the first time in 4 days. His own people, a working communicator, a way to call for extraction, to alert someone, anyone, that a Valdres princess was alive and being hunted through the forest by forces from within her own empire. He looked down at Lyrie, saw the question in her eyes, saw the hope she was too cautious to express, and he nodded. "Let's go," he said. The outpost was real, operational, staffed by 3 humans in standard frontier uniforms who looked exactly as bored and underprepared as every border station crew Rowan had ever encountered during his years of service. The sight of it hit him harder than he expected. The angular lines, the human engineering, the faded insignia on the door that said someone, somewhere, in some office back on Earth, had bothered to stamp this place with an official designation, a reminder that a civilization existed out there. His civilization, with rules and hierarchies and people who were supposed to look out for each other. He'd been in the wilderness so long that the sight of a human-made structure felt almost foreign. Foreign, almost too good to be real. That should have been his first warning. The station chief was a man named Ferris, mid-40s, thinning hair, the particular weariness of someone who had been assigned to a post that no one in command considered important enough to properly supply or regularly inspect. He met them at the entrance, looked at Rowan, then at Lyrie, then back at Rowan, his expression cycling through confusion, surprise, and something else that moved too quickly across his face for Rowan to catch. "She needs medical attention," Rowan said, "and I need your comm. This is a Valdres Royal. Her shuttle was shot down 4 days ago. There are hostile forces searching the forest for her." Ferris blinked, looked at Lyrie again. At the torn robes, the blue skin, the bright amber eyes that watched him with an intensity that seemed to make him uncomfortable. "Royal," Ferris repeated, as if tasting the word. "Princess, heir to the Valdres throne. I need to contact Fleet Command, or anyone with the authority to coordinate a secure extraction." Ferris nodded slowly. "Of course. Come in, both of you. Let's get you dried off and I'll get the comm array warmed up." They were led inside, given dry blankets, offered rations that tasted like cardboard but felt like a feast after 4 days of survival bars and stream water. Lyrie ate cautiously, never fully relaxing, her eyes moving constantly around the small station interior, cataloging exits, studying faces, reading the room with an awareness that seemed beyond her years. Rowan should have been reading the room too. He should have noticed the way Ferris kept glancing toward the back of the station where the comm equipment was housed. The way the 2 other crew members positioned themselves near the exits, rather than settling into the casual postures of people welcoming unexpected guests. The way Ferris's hand trembled slightly when he poured water into a cup and set it on the table. Rowan should have noticed, would have noticed, if he hadn't been so exhausted, so relieved, so desperate to believe that after 4 days of running, he had finally found a place where the rules still worked the way they were supposed to. But Lyrie noticed. She tugged his sleeve, gently, not the urgent tug of warning, the subtle tug of someone who wants your attention without drawing anyone else's. He looked down at her. She met his eyes and gave the smallest shake of her head. "No, something wrong." Rowan's body went cold. Every nerve suddenly lived, his hand drifting casually towards the sidearm at his hip while maintaining the relaxed posture of a man who suspected nothing. Too late. "I'm sorry about this," Ferris said from behind him, his voice carrying the flat tone of a man who had already made his decision and was simply going through the procedural motions of executing it. "Truly, I'm not a bad person, but the money they offered, you have to understand. My family hasn't received supply payments in 11 months. We're out here forgotten. And someone contacted us 3 days ago offering more than I'd make in 20 years to report any Valdres survivors found in this sector." Rowan turned slowly. Ferris had a weapon drawn. So did the 2 crew members flanking the exits, standard human sidearms. Nothing fancy, but at this range, in this confined space, more than enough. "Who contacted you?" Rowan said. Not a question, a demand. "I don't know names, encrypted channel, But the payment codes cleared through a Valdris banking node. Whoever's behind this, it's coming from inside their own government. Rowan's jaw tightened. You know she's a child. I know she's worth more than this entire station and everyone in it combined. Ferris's weapon hand shook, but it stayed raised. I'm not going to hurt her. Just hold her until the pickup team arrives. They were very specific, alive and contained. And me, Ferris's eyes dropped, just for a fraction of a second, but long enough, and Rowan understood. The pickup team wanted no witnesses. He moved. 62 years old, bad knee, 4 days of exhaustion and inadequate food, and a back that still ached from the fall on the ridge. But combat medic training doesn't live in your muscles. It lives in your nervous system, in the wiring that fires before conscious thought catches up, in the 10,000 repetitions of close quarters response drills that your body remembers even when your mind has spent 15 years trying to forget. He swept the table sideways, hard, the metal surface catching Ferris at hip level, knocking his aim wide. The shot fired, went high, punched through the ceiling panel, and sent sparks raining down. Rowan was already moving, grabbing Lyrie, pulling her behind his body, his own weapon drawn, firing once toward the crew member blocking the rear exit, not aiming to kill, aiming to move. The shot hit the wall beside the man's head and he dove sideways, creating the gap Rowan needed. Go, he said to Lyrie, pushing her toward the open doorway. She ran, no hesitation. 3 days of running through forests had taught her that when Rowan said go, you went. Rowan followed, backing through the doorway, keeping his weapon trained on the interior. Ferris had recovered, was shouting orders. The other crew member was circling left, trying to cut off their exit. A shot hit the doorframe 6 inches from Rowan's head. Then something hit him in the right side. Not a full impact, a graze, but deep enough. He felt the heat first, then the pressure, then the wetness spreading across his hip beneath his jacket. The pain arrived a half-second later, sharp enough to make his vision white out at the edges. He didn't stop. He ran, through the rain, through the mud, through the forest that had been trying to kill them for 4 days, and was now the only thing standing between them and 3 men with weapons and instructions to hand over a child to people who wanted her dead. Behind them, Ferris was shouting, words that the rain swallowed into mush. Orders or pleas or threats, it didn't matter. None of it mattered. The only thing that mattered was distance. Distance in the trees. God bless the trees. Every trunk a barrier. Every cluster of branches a broken line of sight. Every meter of dense forest another wall between Lyrie and the men who had done the math on her life and come up with a price tag. Lyrie ran beside him, not behind, beside, her small legs pumping, her face set in that expression of fierce determination he'd first seen when she pulled the communicator from the supply cache and showed him she was more than a scared child waiting to be rescued. She was a survivor. She'd been a survivor before he found her. And whatever happened next, she would keep surviving. But she looked back once, seeing the blood spreading across his hip, her eyes going wide, her pace not slowing. They ran until the outpost disappeared behind them, until the shouting faded into rain, until the forest closed around them again like a fist, hiding them the way it had hidden them since the beginning. Only then did Rowan allow himself to stumble. His hand went to his hip, came away red. The wound was ragged, a deep graze along the outer edge where the energy bolt had caught him while he was turning. Not fatal, not immediately, but deep enough to need treatment he didn't have access to, and bleeding steadily enough that stopping it with pressure alone was going to require time and stillness. 2 things they couldn't afford. Lyrie was beside him immediately, her small hands pulling at his jacket, exposing the wound. Her face went pale, even by Valdris standards, the blue of her skin draining towards something closer to gray. It's okay, he said, knowing it wasn't. Just need to. She didn't wait for him to finish. She pulled the medical kit from her satchel, the Valdris salve, the bandaging material, and with hands that shook only slightly, she began cleaning the wound. Rowan sat against a tree, rain running down his face, watching a 9-year-old alien princess perform field medicine on a wound inflicted by his own species. People who had been offered money to hand her over. People who knew she was a child and did the math anyway. His own people. The words echoed in his head, repeating, gaining weight with each repetition. His own people. The ones who spoke his language, wore his uniform, came from the same dirt and water and sunlight that had built his bones. They'd looked at a child, a small, scared, blue-skinned child with bright eyes and torn robes, and they'd done the arithmetic. How much is a child's life worth? Divided by how much they owed on their supply debts. Multiplied by the number of years they'd spent forgotten on a planet nobody cared about. And the answer came out in credits, not mercy, credits. Rowan had spent 3 years on Tessara telling himself that isolation was a choice, that he lived apart because he preferred it, because the world was simpler when you removed other people from the equation. But the truth was uglier than that, simpler, older. He'd been hiding from exactly this, from the knowledge that people, his people, any people, would betray the most basic promise of decency when the price was right. And now a child from another species, a child his own kind had tried to sell, was kneeling beside him in the rain, cleaning his wound with careful hands, protecting him, because she had decided he was worth protecting. The irony was sharp enough to draw blood. Something inside him cracked, not the door he'd felt opening over the past few days. Something else, something older. The belief, quiet and unexamined, that had lived in the back of his mind since Bravora Station. The belief that at least his own kind, at least humans, would do the right thing when the choice was simple enough. A child's life versus money, and they chose the money. Lyrie finished the bandaging, sat back on her heels, looked at him with those eyes that seemed to hold more understanding than any child should carry. And he looked back at her. This girl from another species, another world, another civilization that his own people had spent decades dismissing as cold and arrogant and incapable of seeing humanity as anything more than a nuisance. She had just saved his life. Again. While the humans behind them had tried to sell hers. The rain fell, the forest breathed around them, and neither of them spoke for a long time. They found shelter as evening fell, a hollow beneath a massive fallen tree, its root system creating a natural overhang just wide enough for two people, one large, one small, to sit side by side and watch the rain turn the forest floor into silver. Rowan had managed to stop the bleeding, mostly. The Valdris salve was remarkable. Whatever chemistry it contained worked on human tissue with an efficiency that made every medical supply he'd ever used feel like a bandage made of hope and good intentions. The pain was still there, dull and constant, pulsing with each heartbeat, but manageable. Lyrie sat beside him, close the way she sat now. Not because she was afraid, but because this was where she had decided she belonged. She was quiet for a long time. Then she spoke, not in her language, in his, halting, broken, words that came out one at a time, like stones being placed carefully into a pattern she was building for the first time. "Mother," she said. Rowan turned his head, looked at her. Mother. Beautiful. She touched her own hair, then gestured outward, indicating something longer, something golden. Hair like sun. She was describing Valerian, her mother, the queen. Strong, Lyrie continued, pressing her small fist against her chest. Very strong. Then her expression shifted, something softer entering her eyes, something that looked like loneliness wearing the face of a child. But sad. She paused, searching for words. Mother, sad because. She looked at Rowan, then looked away, as if what she was about to say required not meeting anyone's eyes. Because, alone, always, alone. The rain filled the silence between them. Rowan understood, not just the words, but the shape of the thing she was describing. A powerful woman, beautiful, untouchable, surrounded by an empire but separated from it by the very authority that defined her. A queen so strong that no one stood close enough to see whether she was breaking. He knew that shape, had worn a version of it himself, the isolation that comes not from having no one around you, but from building walls so high that no one could reach you even if they tried. I understand, he said quietly. Lyrie looked at him, studying his face, reading something there that he hadn't intended to show. You, she said, pointing at him, then touching her own chest again. You, sad, too. It wasn't a question. Rowan's throat tightened. His hand went to the pocket where the copper bracelet lived. The gesture automatic, unconscious. A reflex built over 15 years of reaching for the only thing that still connected him to the life he'd lost. Yes, he said, and the word came out rougher than he expected. I had a daughter, a little girl, like you. Lyrie's eyes widened slightly, not with surprise, with recognition, as if something she had suspected was being confirmed. Where? She asked. The simplest question, the hardest answer. Gone. Rowan looked at the rain, at the way it turned everything silver and gray and formless, the way it erased the edges of things until nothing had a clear boundary anymore. She died 15 years ago. There was an accident, a collapse. I tried to reach her. I could hear her voice. She was calling for me. He stopped, his throat closing around the words like a hand squeezing shut. I was 4 minutes too late. 4 minutes, he'd said it, out loud, to another living being. After 15 years of holding those words inside the locked room, behind the sealed door, in the dark. And now they were out, sitting in the rain between them like something alive, something that had been caged for so long it didn't know how to move in open air. I had never said those words out loud. Not to the therapist on Bravura, not to the co-workers who tried to ask, not to anyone. In 15 years, he had carried them inside the locked room in his chest, behind the door that never opened, and now he was saying them to a 9-year-old alien girl in a hollow under a fallen tree on a planet he'd chosen specifically because it was the furthest place from anywhere that mattered. Lyrie was silent for a long time, long enough that Rowan wondered if she'd understood, long enough that the rain became the only voice in the conversation. Then she moved, not quickly, not suddenly, the way she did everything now, carefully, deliberately. She shifted her body closer to his, reached over, and placed her small hand on top of his, the one resting on his thigh, near the pocket, near the bracelet, near everything he'd been holding alone for 15 years. She didn't say anything, didn't try, just held his hand, and Rowan sat there, in the rain, in the forest, on a world that didn't matter, beside a child who wasn't his, feeling the weight of a small hand on top of his own. And something happened that he didn't expect, couldn't have prepared for, wouldn't have believed if someone had described it to him a week ago. The door opened, the one inside his chest, the one he'd sealed shut 15 years ago and reinforced every day since with silence and distance, in the steady discipline of not feeling anything strong enough to matter. It opened, not all the way, not enough to let everything out, but enough. A crack wide enough for light to enter a room that had been dark for 15 years. His eyes burned, his jaw worked, something hot pressed behind his eyelids. He blinked, swallowed once, twice, breathed through it the way he'd breathed through 1,000 smaller versions of this moment over the years. Except this wasn't a smaller version. This was the real one, the one he'd been avoiding, the one that had been waiting patiently behind the locked door, knowing that eventually, somewhere, something would find the key. A small hand on top of his. That was the key. Then he covered her hand with his other hand, holding it, the way you hold something that matters so much you're afraid of breaking it. They sat like that until the rain stopped, and neither of them let go first. It was near midnight when Lyrie pulled the Valdris communicator from her satchel. Rowan watched her, his side throbbing, his body heavy with exhaustion, his mind running calculations he already knew the answer to. The communicator could reach Valdris military channels. It could send a distress signal that would penetrate the interference of the forest canopy and reach any search vessel within range. It was their best chance, maybe their only chance. But it was also a beacon. The moment they activated it, every receiver within scanning distance would know exactly where they were, including whoever was controlling the search teams that had been hunting them since the crash. Lyrie looked at him, her eyes steady, questioning. He weighed it, carefully, the way a man weighs a decision when both sides of the scale hold something that could kill him. The wound in his hip was bad, not life-threatening yet, but he was losing stamina faster than he could replace it. His body was burning through reserves it didn't have. Another day of running, another day of climbing and hiding and sleeping in hollows and eating survival rations that barely qualified as food. And he might not be able to keep up the pace Lyrie needed him to maintain. If he collapsed, she was alone, 9 years old, on a hostile world with killers in the forest. That math was simple. If they didn't call for help, they might run out of time before help could reach them. If they did call, they might bring the enemy straight to their position before help arrived. Either way, the odds were terrible. But terrible odds with a chance were better than certain failure without one. "Do it," he said. Lyrie's fingers moved across the communicator with practiced ease, adjusting frequencies, setting encryption protocols. She entered a sequence that Rowan recognized as a royal distress code, something only members of the imperial family would know. A signal that would cut through standard military channels and reach the highest levels of Valdris command. The device pulsed. Once, twice, a confirmation tone, signal transmitted. Lyrie looked up at him, eyes bright. "Done," she said. "Mother, we'll hear." Rowan nodded, allowed himself one breath of relief. Just one. Then he heard the engines. Not from far away, not from the distance they'd been hearing search vehicles for the past 4 days. These were close, very close, coming in fast, and not from the direction of the Valdris homeworld. From behind them, from the direction of the crash site. Too fast, too soon. No rescue fleet could have responded this quickly. The signal had been transmitted less than 2 minutes ago. Whatever was coming, it had already been en route, already been in the air, waiting. Because someone had been monitoring the frequency, not waiting for the signal to arrive at its destination, waiting for the signal itself, using it as a locator, a trap disguised as a lifeline. Dravane. Of course, he would be monitoring royal distress frequencies. He controlled the entire search operation. He had access to every communication channel in the military network. The moment Lyrie activated that signal, he knew exactly where they were. Rowan grabbed her, pulled her to her feet, his hips screaming in protest, the wound tearing fresh beneath the bandage. "Run!" They ran, through the dark, through the trees, through terrain they could barely see, branches whipping across their faces, roots catching their feet, the sound of engines growing louder, closer, dropping altitude. Searchlights cut through the canopy above them, bright blue beams sweeping the forest floor in wide arcs. Hunting, systematic, professional. They ran until the trees ended. A ridge, steep, the ground dropping away into darkness on the other side. A cliff face that disappeared into shadow below. No path forward, no path around, just the edge, and behind them, the sound of boots hitting the ground as armored figures dropped from a transport vessel that had landed 50 meters back in the trees. Rowan turned, placed himself between Lyrie and the approaching sound, drew his sidearm, checked the charge. Low, maybe 4 shots. 5 if the power cell was feeling generous. 5 shots against a professional kill team. The figures emerged from the trees, 6 of them. Dark armor, Valdris military grade, moving with the coordinated precision of soldiers who had done this many times before. Weapons drawn, helmets sealed, visors reflecting the searchlight in cold blue lines. Not hunters this time, not mismatched mercenaries in patched armor. These were professionals, Dravane's personal operatives, the best he had. They spread out, forming a semicircle, cutting off every angle of retreat except the cliff behind them. Their leader stepped forward, helmet visor sliding open, revealing a face that was calm, composed, entirely without emotion. He studied Rowan, then looked at Lyrie, then back at Rowan, and spoke in translated human speech. Clear, precise. "You've caused a great deal of trouble, more than anyone expected from a single human on a border world." Rowan said nothing. His weapon steady, his body positioned so that no clear shot at Lyrie existed without going through him first. The leader tilted his head. "I have orders. The child comes with us. You are not part of those orders, which means you have a choice. Step aside, walk back into this forest, disappear, and nothing that happens next needs to involve you. Rowan felt Lyrie's hands on his back, gripping his jacket, her fingers finding the fabric the way they always did, curling into it, holding on. He thought about the wreckage, the blue fingers pressing against twisted metal. He thought about the cave, the first time she said her name. He thought about the stream, her hand not letting go. He thought about the fire, her hand on his. The silence that said more than 15 years of words he'd never spoken. I thought about Emmy, 4 minutes, a copper bracelet, a voice in the rubble calling daddy, and he thought about what kind of man walks away from a child to save himself. What kind of man does that math and comes out with a number he can live with? Not this one. No, Rowan said. The word landed in the silence like a stone dropped into still water. The leader studied him for a long moment, something shifting behind his eyes. Not respect exactly, but recognition. The recognition of someone encountering a variable they hadn't planned for. You understand what that means, the leader said. I do. You're injured, outgunned, outnumbered. There is no scenario in which you survive this if you resist. Rowan tightened his grip on the weapon, felt the copper bracelet shift in his pocket, felt Lyrie's hands against his back. Then I don't survive it. Simple, clean, the way a man speaks when he's finished calculating and the math has given him an answer he can live with. Even if living with it means not living at all. He raised the weapon. 5 shots, 6 soldiers, 1 cliff, and a girl behind him who had taught him in 4 days what 15 years of grief couldn't, that it wasn't too late, that it was never too late, until it was. Behind him, Lyrie pressed her face against the back of his jacket, her forehead against his spine, her hands twisted into the fabric at his waist. He could feel her heartbeat through the contact. Fast, terrified. But she didn't run, didn't try to hide, didn't look for an escape that didn't exist. She stayed, because he was staying. And somewhere during the past 4 days, she had decided that where he stood was where she stood, no matter what came next. The leader's hand moved toward the trigger of his weapon. His team mirrored the motion. 6 barrels, all aimed, all steady. Lyrie's grip tightened on Rowan's jacket, and the copper bracelet pressed against his thigh, warm from his body heat, the way it had pressed for 15 years. Through every shift, every sleepless night, every morning he woke up and decided to keep going for no reason he could name. Now he had a reason. Standing behind him, holding on. Emmy would have wanted him to stay. Part 3, the moment before a trigger is pulled lasts longer than physics should allow. Rowan knew this, had known it since his first deployment. The way time stretches, slows, becomes thick and heavy like air before a storm. Every detail sharpening until the world looks more real than it has any right to be. He could see the grain of the leather on the leader's glove, the way his index finger pressed against the trigger guard. Not on the trigger itself, not yet. Still resting, still deciding. The fraction of an inch between intention and action. He could hear Lyrie's breathing behind him. Fast, shallow, the rhythm of a child trying to be brave when everything in her body was screaming to run. He could feel the copper bracelet in his pocket, pressing against his thigh, warm from his body heat. The last piece of Emmy he would ever touch. 5 shots, 6 soldiers, 1 cliff. This was the math, and the math didn't lie. But Rowan had stopped caring about math 4 days ago, when he pulled a blue-skinned girl from a burning shuttle and promised himself he would get her somewhere safe. I thought about telling her to run, thought about creating a distraction, firing his remaining shots and giving her a chance to slip past the soldiers in the chaos. Thought about what a smart man would do, a tactical man, a man who calculated odds and made rational decisions based on probability. Then he stopped thinking, because the girl behind him wasn't a calculation, wasn't a probability. She was Lyrie, and she was holding his jacket, and running meant letting go, and letting go wasn't something either of them did anymore. He raised his weapon, aimed at the leader, and waited for whatever came next. Thousands of light years away, at that exact moment, the lock broke. Queen Valoran had spent 48 hours dismantling Dravain's encryption, not with military code breakers, not with intelligence officers, Not with anyone whose loyalty might trace back through channels Dravain could access. She did it herself, alone, in the strategic command chamber, behind locked doors, using decryption tools she hadn't touched in decades, skills from a younger version of herself, a version that had fought her way to the throne through enemies far less patient than Dravain. And when the encryption finally gave way, when the hidden communication logs spilled across her screen in streams of decoded text, she read every word, every contact with the mercenary teams on Tessara, every payment authorization routed through shell accounts, every instruction: find the princess, eliminate, no witnesses, no traces. The order to shoot down the shuttle, issued 12 hours before departure, routed through a military relay that only someone with Dravain's security clearance could access. The order to redirect search teams away from the actual crash coordinates, issued 90 minutes into the search operation, before any evidence existed to justify the redirect. The order to monitor royal distress frequencies, to intercept any signal Lyrie might send, to use it as a locator, to send kill teams instead of rescue. 20 years, every meeting, every council session, every moment he had stood beside her with his head bowed and his voice measured and his loyalty worn like armor. 20 years of it, all performance, all architecture, all building toward this. A dead princess, a grieving queen, an empire without an heir, and a chancellor positioned to step into the vacuum. Valoran read to the last line, then sat very still. Her reflection stared back at her from the dark screen. A face that looked too young to carry what it was carrying, too beautiful to hold this much rage. But it held it, all of it. She did not scream, did not weep, did not sweep the terminal from the desk, or drive her fist through the glass the way a lesser ruler might have. She stood, walked to the chamber door, opened it, addressed the guard stationed outside with a voice so controlled it made the air temperature drop. Seal Lord Dravain's quarters. No one enters or leaves. No communications in or out. Arrest anyone who resists. The guard hesitated, one fraction of a second, then snapped to attention and moved. Valoran walked to her private armory, unlocked it with biometrics that recognized only her, and began putting on battle armor she had not worn in 15 years. The chest plate first, gold and black, inlaid with the royal crest, heavier than she remembered, the weight settling across her shoulders like a sentence. Then the gauntlets, the greaves, the helm, each piece locking into place with the precision of engineering designed to survive a warship's hull breach. She caught her reflection in the armory's polished wall, and for one strange moment, saw not a queen, but a mother, dressed for war. Because the only war that had ever truly mattered to her was the one being fought over a single child on a forgotten planet. She walked to the Fleet Command Center. Every officer in the room stood at attention the moment she entered, their eyes widening at the sight of their queen in full battle armor, something none of them had witnessed in their careers. "I am assuming direct command of the Tessara search operation," she said, her voice cutting through the room like a blade laid flat against glass. "All vessels currently deployed under Chancellor Dravain's authority are to stand down immediately. A new fleet deployment will launch within the hour. I will lead it personally." Silence. Then movement. Every officer in the room pivoting to execute. Because when a queen in full battle armor gave an order, you did not ask questions, you did not seek clarification, you moved. The fleet launched 17 minutes later, 12 warships, 300 royal guards, enough firepower to reduce a continent to glass, and at the helm of the command vessel. Valoran stood, watching the stars blur into streaking light as they jumped toward Tessara. Her daughter was alive. She knew it now. Dravain's intercepted communications confirmed that Lyrie had not been found dead. That someone, a human, had pulled her from the wreckage and disappeared into the forest with her. That every team sent to retrieve her had failed. A human was protecting her daughter. The thought sat strangely in her mind, refusing to settle into any shape she recognized. Her people had spent generations dismissing humans as primitive, self-interested, incapable of the kind of sacrifice that the Valdris valued above all else. And yet, One of them was standing between her daughter and death. She would deal with the contradiction later. First, she would deal with the men who had tried to kill her child. On the ridge, time resumed. The leader spoke one word, a command, short and sharp, and the 6 soldiers began to close in, slow, coordinated, weapons level, moving the way predators move when they've already decided the outcome. Rowan fired. The first shot hit the nearest soldier's weapon hand, not a kill shot, a disabling shot. Combat medic. Even now, even at the end, he aimed to stop, not to destroy. The weapon spun away. The soldier staggered back. The formation broke, just slightly, just enough. Lyrie pressed tighter against his back. He could feel her shaking, but she didn't move, didn't run. Held her ground the way he'd taught her without ever teaching her. By doing it, every day, for 5 days, you stand where you stand and you don't move until moving serves a purpose. The leader barked a command. The remaining 5 repositioned, tightening the semicircle. Rowan fired twice more. One shot hitting armor, deflecting. The other close enough to a visor that the soldier flinched backward. Buying seconds he couldn't afford. 3 shots remaining. His hip screamed. The wound had reopened. He could feel the warmth spreading down his leg. The familiar lightheadedness of blood leaving places it was supposed to stay. His vision flickered at the edges. Gray creeping inward. Not yet. Not yet. Stay up. Stay standing. 4 more minutes. Just give me 4 more minutes. The number hit him like a punch. 4 minutes. The same number. Always the same number. One of the soldiers flanked right, moving fast, trying to get an angle around Rowan's position, toward Lyrie. Rowan shifted, put himself in the path, fired again. The shot went wide. His hand was shaking now. Blood loss, exhaustion, the wound in his hip pulsing with every heartbeat, sending waves of heat through his side that made his vision swim. 2 shots remaining. The leader raised his weapon, aimed, and something cold settled across his expression. The patience of a professional reaching the end of a negotiation. Last chance, he said. You're going to die on this ridge for a child who isn't yours. A child whose people would not do the same for you. Rowan's jaw tightened. He thought of the cave, the ration bar, the name whispered in the dark. Lyrie. He thought of the stream, the hand that wouldn't let go. He thought of the fire, the small palm on top of his, the door opening. She would, Rowan said. She already has. The leader's finger moved to the trigger, and the sky split open. Not thunder, not lightning, something deeper. A sound that started in the bones and worked its way outward until the air itself seemed to vibrate. A resonance so deep and so massive that every person on that ridge stopped moving, stopped breathing, stopped existing for one frozen second as the sound washed over them like a wave. Then the ships came through the clouds. 12 of them, vast, dark-hulled, bearing the gold and black markings of the Valdres Royal Fleet, descending through the cloud cover with a precision that made the mercenary transports look like toys scattered by a careless child. Their engines casting blue light across the ridge, turning the entire mountainside into a stage lit from above. The soldiers froze, their weapons lowering incrementally as the scale of what they were seeing registered against the scale of what they had been prepared for. This was not a search party, not a patrol, not a response team. This was the Queen's fleet, the full might of the Valdres Empire. Arriving in person, the leader's face went white behind his visor. Armored figures began dropping from the largest vessel, not jumping, descending, on controlled lines of light, landing on the ridge in perfect formation. Royal guards, dozens of them, moving with a grace and discipline that made the mercenaries look like children playing at war. They formed a perimeter, weapons trained outward, cutting off every possible escape route, and at the center of the descending force, one figure stood apart, smaller than the guards, but carrying a presence that dwarfed everyone on that ridge. Battle armor gleaming gold and black in the searchlights, a helm that caught the light and threw it back in sharp angles, and beneath the helm's edge, a cascade of golden hair, catching the wind, catching the light, catching every eye on the mountain. Queen Valoran descended to the ridge, And silence fell, complete, absolute, the kind of silence that exists in the space between a question and an answer that will change everything. Valerin's boots touched stone. She straightened, scanned the ridge, her eyes burning with something that was not rage, not grief, something beyond both, something that had passed through both and come out the other side as pure and terrible clarity. Her gaze swept across the frozen mercenaries, dismissed them, moved on, and found Rowan, a human, standing at the edge of a cliff, blood soaking through his jacket at the hip, a weapon raised in a hand that was visibly shaking. His body positioned so that no angle existed, no line of fire, no path that could reach the small figure behind him without going through his body first. And behind him, Lyrae, alive. Valerin's breath stopped. For one terrible moment, that was all she saw. A human, armed, standing over her daughter, blood on his clothes, a weapon in his hand. Every nightmare she had spent the last 5 days constructing. Every image of human cruelty and indifference that her culture had built over generations. Every fear she had voiced in her private chambers about what would happen if her daughter fell into human hands. It all crystallized into this single image. An instinct took over. "Weapons on the human," she said, her voice hard, flat, imperial. 20 guards shifted aim. 20 weapons locked onto Rowan's center mass. Rowan didn't move, didn't lower his weapon. His eyes met Valerin's across 30 meters of ridge, and even through the exhaustion, through the blood loss, through the haze of pain and fear and 4 days of running, he recognized the look in her eyes, a mother's terror, wearing the face of a queen. I understood, because he had been on the other side of that equation once, the other side of the rubble, the other side of 4 minutes. He lowered his weapon, slowly, let it drop to the stone at his feet, raised both hands, palms open, the way he'd done 5 days ago, in front of a crashed shuttle, for a small girl with frightened eyes. "I'm not going to hurt her," he said. Quiet, steady, the same words, the same tone. "I never was." Valerin's jaw tightened. Her hand remained raised, the command to fire still hovering between intention and execution. And Lyrae moved. She stepped out from behind Rowan. Small, thin, wearing a torn robe and an oversized human jacket that dragged along the ground behind her, her blue skin catching the searchlight. She walked forward, 3 steps, then stopped, turned, looked back at Rowan, at the guards aiming at him, at the weapons trained on the man who had carried her through forests and mountains and rivers and betrayals for 5 days. And something ignited behind her eyes. She turned back, walked to Rowan, and stood in front of him. Between him and 20 weapons, a 9-year-old girl, standing between a human and an army. Her small arms spread wide, her chin raised, her torn robe dragging on the stone. The oversized jacket Rowan had given her on their first night hanging off her narrow shoulders like a flag, like proof, like evidence of 5 days she would never forget and a debt she would never consider paid. She looked at her mother, at the queen, at the most powerful woman in 1,000 star systems, and she spoke, in her mother's language, clear, loud, loud enough for every guard on the ridge to hear, loud enough to echo off the stone and carry across the entire mountainside. Rowan didn't understand the words, but he understood the shape of what she was saying, the desperation, the authority, the absolute refusal to move. She was telling her mother everything. The crash, the fire, the hands that pulled her free, the cave, the ration bar, the name, the stream, the cliff, the fall, the wound, the night beside the fire when she held his hand and he told her about a daughter named Emmy, and the moment on this ridge when 6 men offered him his life in exchange for hers, and he said no. Valerin listened. Her hand, the one holding the command to fire, slowly descended to her side. The weapons lowered, one by one. 20 guards standing down because the look on their queen's face told them something had changed, something fundamental, something that would take years to fully understand. But that was visible right now in the way a mother's rage dissolved into something far more complicated than fury. Valerin walked forward, each step deliberate, her armor catching the light, her golden hair moving with each stride. until she stood 3 meters from her daughter and knelt, not gradually, not with royal grace. She dropped, fast, hard, her armored knees hitting the stone with a sound that echoed across the silent ridge like a door slamming open, like the sound of every wall she'd ever built coming apart at once, and pulled Lyrie into an embrace so fierce that it seemed to erase everything else. Her arms wrapped around her daughter with the desperate strength of someone holding a miracle they had already mourned, pressing Lyrie against the cold breastplate of her armor, not caring that the metal dug into her chest, not caring that the ridge was watching, not caring about 10,000 years of royal tradition that said a queen does not kneel, does not weep, does not show the court the interior of her heart. Because this wasn't the court. This was her daughter. And that was different. That was everything. Her golden hair fell forward, spilling over Lyrie's shoulders, covering them both, a curtain of gold hiding whatever passed between them in those first seconds. And the guards, 300 of the most disciplined soldiers in the Valdres Empire, trained to show nothing, feel nothing in the field, saw their queen cry. The face that had never shown weakness, the face that had commanded fleets and ended wars and negotiated the fate of civilizations without a single crack in its composure. That face, young and sharp and carved from something harder than stone, broke. Tears ran down skin so pale it seemed luminous, down cheeks that hadn't shown emotion in public in living memory. And the sound she made, small, private, utterly human in its rawness, despite coming from a throat that had never produced a human word. It was the sound of someone getting back something they had already buried. Rowan stood 3 meters away, hands still raised, body swaying slightly from blood loss, and watched the reunion through eyes that stung for reasons that had nothing to do with the searchlight. Because he knew what that embrace looked like from the other direction, knew what it felt like to reach for someone you thought you'd lost. He'd reached once, through rubble, through stone, and his arms had come back empty. But Valoran's hadn't. And standing there, bleeding on a ridge, on a planet he'd chosen because it was the farthest place from anywhere that mattered, Rowan Hollis felt something he hadn't expected to feel ever again. Gratitude, not for himself, for them, for the fact that, in this particular story, the mother's arms didn't come back empty. At least one of them got to hold on. Valoran finally released Lyrie enough to look at her, her armored hands moving gently over her daughter's face, her arms checking for damage the way mothers do, the way all mothers do, regardless of species or civilization or the number of stars in their empire. When her eyes found the healed cut along Lyrie's temple, something dangerous flickered. Then she looked at Rowan. She stood, slowly, her composure reassembling itself. Not fully, not the way it had been before, but enough to function, enough to speak. She crossed the distance between them, stopped, close enough that he could see the remnants of tears still drying on her face. This woman who looked barely 30, who was older than anything Rowan could comprehend, who had ancient eyes and a face that belonged in a painting rather than on a battlefield. She studied him, the torn jacket, the bloodied hip, the hands still raised in surrender, the exhaustion written into every line of his face and body after 5 days of doing something that no strategic analysis would have predicted. No risk assessment would have recommended. No rational calculation would have justified. "You kept my daughter alive," she said, her translated voice carrying a weight that pressed against his chest. "When my entire empire failed her, a single human, armed with nothing, stood where my armies did not." "She's a kid," Rowan said, his voice rough, cracking at the edges. "She was scared, she was hurt. That's all I needed to know." Valoran was silent, her eyes searching his face for something, finding it, and not quite knowing what to do with it. "My people have believed for generations that humans are incapable of sacrifice, that your species values only its own survival." "Some of us do," Rowan said, thinking of Ferris, the outpost, the math done on a child's life. "And some of us don't." Valoran held his gaze for a long moment, then extended her hand, palm open, a gesture that crossed every boundary between their two civilizations without needing a single word of translation. Rowan took it, felt the grip, firm, deliberate. the handshake of someone who had just rewritten a belief system and was choosing to build something new in its place. The Valdres Empire does not forget debts, she said, and this debt I intend to honor properly. Aboard the command vessel, Rowan was taken to the medical bay. Valdres physicians surrounded him with technology, so advanced it looked like magic to someone who'd spent 3 years patching energy gates with a welding torch. They treated the hip wound first, then the older injuries, the scrapes, the bruises, the deep exhaustion that had settled into his bones like sediment at the bottom of a river. Their instruments hummed against his skin, cool, painless, closing wounds that human medicine would have needed weeks to address. Larry refused to leave his side. She sat on a low chair beside the treatment table, watching every procedure, occasionally speaking to the medical staff in rapid Valdres. And though Rowan couldn't understand the words, he recognized the tone. She was giving instructions, making sure they treated him properly, overseeing his care the way a daughter oversees the treatment of family. It was during this time that Valerian returned, no longer in battle armor, wearing simpler robes that softened her presence, her hair loose around her shoulders, her face showing the particular tiredness that comes not from lack of sleep, but from the expenditure of an enormous amount of controlled emotion. She watched the interaction between her daughter and Rowan for a long moment, standing in the doorway, observing. "She has not left your side once since we arrived," Valerian said, her voice quiet, carrying wonder rather than suspicion. "In all her years, I have never seen her attach herself so completely to anyone outside our family, let alone a stranger from another species." "We went through a lot together," Rowan said. "That changes things." Valerian settled into a seat across from where he lay, her posture shifting into something less formal, less guarded. The queen fading, the mother emerging. "When I received word that her shuttle had been destroyed," Valerian said, "my first fear was not simply that she had died, but that if she had survived, she would fall into human hands and suffer for it. I imagine that fear wasn't entirely without basis," Rowan said carefully. Valerian's expression shifted. Lyrie had told her about Ferris, about the outpost, about the price tag placed on a child's life by men who shared Rowan's species. "And yet," Valerian said, "you are the reason she is alive, a human, against your own kind, against mine, against every calculation that should have told you to walk away." Her eyes searched his face. "Why? Because the moment I saw her in that wreckage, scared and alone, none of the differences mattered anymore. She was just a child who needed help, and I was someone who could give it." Valerian was quiet for a long time. Then she spoke softly. "That simplicity may be exactly what our two peoples have been missing." In the weeks that followed, events moved with the particular speed that only empires are capable of when a queen is personally motivated. Dravain was arrested at the capital, his quarters sealed, his allies identified and neutralized within days. The evidence Valerian had extracted from his encrypted communications was absolute and irrefutable. 20 years of meticulous treachery, documented in his own words, on his own channels, with his own authorization codes. The trial was held before the full court. Hundreds of Valdres nobles and officials filling a vast hall lined with columns carved from deep blue crystal. The same hall where Dravain had stood at the queen's side for 2 decades, now standing in chains, his face a mask of nothing. 20 years of performance stripped away, leaving only the hollow architecture beneath. Lyrie testified. She stood before the full court and spoke, not in her mother's language, in Rowan's. Slowly, carefully, each word placed with the deliberate precision of someone building a bridge out of syllables they had only recently learned. She chose to speak in the human language, not because the court required it, not because her own tongue lacked the vocabulary, but because she wanted Rowan to understand. Every word, every detail, every piece of the story they had lived together. The court listened in silence, translators converting her halting English into Valdres for those who needed it. But many understood enough, had learned enough, to follow the small voice of their princess as she described the worst 5 days of her life, and the human who had made them survivable. And Rowan sat in the gallery, listening to a 9-year-old princess describe in halting but clear English how a human stranger had pulled her from wreckage, fed her, sheltered her, shielded her with his own body, told her about a daughter he had lost, and refused to hand her over even when a weapon was aimed at his chest and his own death was the guaranteed alternative. Dravain did not speak in his own defense. There was nothing to say. The evidence was absolute. The testimony was devastating. And the look on the Queen's face made clear that whatever mercy the Valdres legal system might have offered, it would not be coming from the throne. He was sentenced to permanent imprisonment, stripped of title, stripped of rank, stripped of the name he had spent 2 decades building into a weapon aimed at the crown. And when the guards led him away, Lyrae watched him go with steady eyes. No fear, no hatred, just the quiet certainty of a child who had seen the worst of betrayal and chosen not to let it define what she believed about people. 4 weeks after the rescue, Rowan stood in a hall made of crystal. The Valdres capital was everything he'd imagined and nothing he could have prepared for. Towers of pale stone rising into skies that held 3 distant suns, architecture that seemed grown rather than built, as if the city itself was a living thing that had decided to become beautiful and then spent 1,000 years perfecting the decision. The great hall was vast, columns of deep blue crystal lining both walls, hundreds of Valdres nobles filling the space, their voices hushed to murmurs as Rowan walked forward beneath their collective gaze. A human, in the heart of an alien empire, wearing a uniform provided by the Queen's own tailor. His hip had healed. Valdres medical technology had seen to that. The wound closed within days, the pain gone within a week. His body stronger than it had been in years. As if their medicine hadn't just repaired the damage, but quietly improved everything it touched along the way. At the far end of the hall, on a raised platform, Valoran sat upon her throne, formal robes of deep gold, a crown that caught the light of the crystal columns and scattered it into small rainbows across the polished floor. And beside her, on a smaller throne, Lyrae, no longer wearing torn robes and an oversized jacket, but bright flowing garments that suited a princess restored to her rightful place. Her blue skin clean and luminous, her eyes bright. When those eyes found Rowan across the length of the hall, she smiled, not a princess's smile, not diplomatic or measured or rehearsed. The smile of a girl seeing someone she trusted, someone who had carried her through fire and forest and fear, and had kept every promise he'd made without ever speaking most of them out loud. She gave a small wave, discreet, half hidden behind the arm of her throne. Rowan answered with a quiet nod. Valoran rose from her throne. The murmuring stopped. Every eye in the room fixed upon her as she descended the steps to stand before Rowan directly, a gesture that visibly surprised half the nobles present. Queens did not descend, subjects ascended. But Valoran had stopped following that particular rule about 4 weeks ago. On a ridge, on her knees, in full battle armor, holding her daughter. "Rowan Hollis," she said, her voice carrying through the crystal hall with the clarity of a bell struck once. "You stand today not as a stranger from a distant world, but as one who has proven through action what no words could ever achieve. That courage and compassion are not the property of any single species." She paused. Let the weight of the statement settle across the gathered court. "In recognition of your actions, I am initiating formal negotiations with human leadership to establish an alliance between our peoples, not as distant strangers divided by mistrust, but as partners, bound by the understanding that honor exists in every corner of this galaxy, regardless of the shape it takes." Applause, murmured discussion, the sound of hundreds of beings processing a shift in their civilization's trajectory that had begun with one man pulling a child from a burning shuttle. Lyrae rose from her throne, descended the steps, crossed the hall toward Rowan with the careful, deliberate walk of someone who has practiced something and wants to get it right. She stopped in front of him, looked up, and spoke, in English, words she had spent weeks learning, practicing, perfecting. "Thank you," she said, her accent still unfamiliar around the syllables, but her meaning clear as daylight. "For keeping your promise." Rowan knelt, slowly, bringing himself to her eye level, looking at the girl he had pulled from wreckage 5 weeks ago, the frightened child with bright eyes and blue skin and a hand that reached for his sleeve in the dark. I told you I wasn't going to let anyone hurt you, he said softly. I meant it. She threw her arms around his neck. And from the gathered court, from the hundreds of nobles and officials and dignitaries who had spent generations believing that humans were beneath consideration, a sound rose, soft at first, then growing. Approval, recognition, the sound of a room full of people watching a wall come down. Lyrie held on, tight, the way she held everything now, with complete intention, complete trust, no reservation. Then she pulled back, looked at him with eyes that had seen more in 5 weeks than most people see in a lifetime, and reached into the folds of her ceremonial robe. She pulled out a small object, held it in both hands, extended it toward him. A bracelet. Not copper, not human-made. Valdrus craftsmanship. Material that seemed to hold light within itself. Glowing faintly. The way Lyrie's skin glowed. Warm and alive and carrying the particular luminescence of something that existed between worlds. And engraved on the inside, in human letters, in English. A single name. Emmy. Rowan stared at it. The hall went quiet. Lyrie spoke, slowly, each word chosen with the same careful precision she had used during her testimony. Each syllable placed like a stone in a path she was building towards something she needed him to understand. I asked Mother, she said. I asked what you give someone who saved your life. She said, when someone saves your life, they become family. She paused, swallowed, and when she spoke again, her voice was smaller, softer, but steady. And family remembers, the people that family has lost. Rowan's hand went to his pocket, the gesture automatic, unconscious, 15 years of reaching for the same object. The copper bracelet, tarnished, bent at the clasp, engraved with the name he hadn't spoken aloud until 5 weeks ago. In a forest, in the rain, to a 9-year-old girl who held his hand and didn't let go. He looked at the new bracelet in Lyrie's hands, then at the old one in his pocket. Two objects, two materials, two worlds, one name, Emmy, his daughter, who had been 8 years old, who had laughed like water over stones, who had grabbed his sleeve during thunderstorms, who had called his name through rubble while he dug with bleeding hands, who had been 4 minutes away from being saved, who had never been forgotten. Not for one day, not for 1 hour, not for one breath in 15 years. And now her name was written in light, in the language of an alien empire, on a bracelet held by a child who had decided that remembering mattered. That loss mattered, that the people we carry with us deserve to be carried by more hands than just our own. Rowan took the bracelet, and something broke. Not the way things break when they shatter, not the sharp, violent fracture of something destroyed, the way things break when they finally let go of what they've been holding. The way ice breaks in spring, he cried. Rowan Hollis, 62 years old, former combat medic, welder, the man who hadn't cried since the day they pulled him away from Tunnel 7 with dirt under his fingernails and his daughter's name still in his throat. He cried, not loudly, not dramatically, the way grief cries when it has been stored too long, when it has been compressed so tightly for so many years that it has forgotten what shape it was supposed to be. When the door finally opens and everything comes through at once, not as a flood, but as a single long exhale, 15 years of held breath, finally released. Lyrie stepped forward, put her arms around his neck again, held him while he shook, her small hand pressed flat against his back, the same way he had pressed his hand against hers in the wreckage, in the cave, on the ridge, holding on. Because that's what family does. The hall was completely silent. 300 Valdrus nobles watching a human cry in the arms of their princess. And not one of them looked away. Not one of them shifted uncomfortably or glanced at a neighbor or questioned the spectacle. Because they understood. Not the details, not the name or the mind collapse or the 15 years, but the shape of it, the universal shape of loss and love, and the moment when someone gives you back a piece of something you thought was gone forever. Every species understands that. Every species. Valoran watched from the platform, her hair catching the crystal light, her face holding an expression that was neither grief nor joy, but something between them. Something that had no name in any language. The expression of a woman watching her daughter heal a wound she had not inflicted. In a man she had almost ordered killed. Later, after the ceremony, after the hall had emptied and the formal proceedings had given way to quieter conversations in smaller rooms, Rowan sat alone in the quarters the queen had provided. He placed both bracelets on the desk before him. The copper one on the left, tarnished, bent. 15 years of being carried in a jacket pocket, of being touched 10,000 times by a hand that couldn't let go, engraved in rough human lettering. Emmy. The Valdres one on the right, luminous, warm, glowing with the faint light of a material that existed nowhere on Earth, engraved in careful human letters. The same name, side by side. Two worlds, one word. He touched the copper bracelet with his left hand, then the Valdres bracelet with his right, holding both at the same time, feeling the weight of each, one old and heavy with years, one new and light with something that felt like the beginning of something. He hadn't replaced Emmy. Nobody could replace Emmy. Nobody should. She was his daughter. She was 8 years old. She laughed like water over stones. She grabbed his sleeve during storms. She called his name in the dark. And she was gone. And she would always be gone. But, he had found something he didn't know he was looking for. Not a replacement. Not a second chance. Something different. Something that the old grief counselors never mentioned because there wasn't a clinical term for it. A reason to keep going, to keep fixing things, to keep reaching for hands that needed holding, to keep standing between the things that scared children and the children who were scared. Not because it would bring Emmy back. Nothing would bring Emmy back. But because Emmy would have wanted him to. Because the girl who grabbed his sleeve during thunderstorms would not have wanted her father to spend the rest of his life with his hands empty. She would have wanted him to reach, to hold, to protect, to show up. 4 minutes early this time, Rowan closed his fingers around both bracelets, held them against his chest. In the months that followed, he remained within the Valdres capital as formal negotiations took shape between human and Valdres representatives. His role shifted. No longer a welder, no longer a nobody on a border planet. Something else. A liaison, a bridge, a living reminder that the alliance between two civilizations had begun not with treaties or diplomats, but with a man kneeling in wreckage and lifting a child he didn't know into arms that had been empty for 15 years. Lyrie visited him often, her English improving rapidly. Their conversations growing longer, richer. She told him about her studies, her tutors, the particular frustration of being a princess expected to master 16 subjects simultaneously. He told her about welding, about the satisfaction of joining two pieces of metal so perfectly that you couldn't see the seam. She liked that, the metaphor of it. Two things made into one by heat and patience. And sometimes, in the quiet moments between conversations, when the light in his quarters turned amber the way it did on Tessara afternoons, she would reach over, without looking, and take his sleeve between two fingers. Just hold it, the way she had since the beginning, and Rowan would sit very still and let her hold on, for as long as she needed, for as long as they both needed. Outside the viewport, stars stretched endlessly, human worlds and Valdres worlds and the vast dark spaces between them where anything was possible, where a crashed shuttle could become an alliance, where a frightened child could become family, where a man who arrived 4 minutes too late could spend the rest of his life making sure he was never late again. Two bracelets on a desk, one copper, one light, both carrying the same name, both proof that love doesn't end where loss begins. It just keeps reaching, 4 minutes late, 15 years lost, and still reaching, always reaching.